Welcome to the Earning Freedom Podcast. I am Michael Santos with michaelsantos.com and prisonprofessor.com, and I'm really excited to be continuing the series, the Earning Freedom Mastermind series. It's a series that I designed specifically for people who are serving time in prisons and jails across America, for people who really are living in struggle and want to overcome that struggle and begin preparing for a better life. I feel very passionate about sharing this message because it's the message that got me through 26 years in prison. It's a message that not only got me through 26 years in prison, but allowed me to serve every one of those days with a high level of energy and discipline and passion for preparing for a life of relevance and significance and meaning. And it's what I want any individual who is going through struggle to really understand, that they have the power within to pull themselves up and to begin preparing for success. And I'm not somebody who's giving you this message from an ivory tower. I'm giving you this message from the benefit of experience, of having gone to prison back in 1987 when authorities arrested me as a consequence of stupid, bad criminal decisions I started making when I was 20 years old. For those of you who are watching this video for the first time, this video series for the first time, I'm going to give you a quick recap. I'll do that on every one of these videos that I'm creating to accompany the Earning Freedom Mastermind Course. I started making bad decisions when I was 20 years old after I saw the movie Scarface, began trafficking in cocaine. As a consequence of that, I was arrested on August the 11th, 1987, and I was subsequently sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. As a consequence of that sentence, at the time that it existed, the sentencing laws that existed back in 1987 meant that I would have to serve 26 years in prison. And so I embarked upon that journey, starting off in the Pierce County Jail in Tacoma, Washington, and then went through a series of penitentiaries and federal correctional institutions, and then minimum security camps. But every day that I served, I can tell you, was empowering and preparing me for a life of success because I was on a deliberate path. And I would love to say that I created that path myself, but the reality is I learned it from masterminds. It all began when I read this book about Socrates. This is the actual book that is a part of this course. It's called the Earning Freedom Mastermind Course, and it begins by describing how I was exposed to Socrates when I was locked inside of that jail cell. And having read that book, it just caused me to rethink my life, the decisions that I had been making. It helped me recognize that, I had a bad philosophy growing up, and that philosophy was driven by a reckless pursuit of a fast life. As a consequence, I disappointed my parents. I disappointed my community. I broke the law, and I was sentenced to prison. And that, for many people, would have thought that would have been the end. In fact, in the last episode, I spoke about what the prosecutor said, who wanted me to spend the rest of my life in prison. He'd said that if I spent every day of my life on an all-consuming effort to repay society for the bad decisions that I had made, and if I lived it to be 300 years old, the community would still be at a significant net loss. And I always go back to that sentence because it continues to enforce or fortify this position that regardless of where you are today, regardless of what society says you are today, you can embark upon a journey to build a better life, a stronger life, a life that will allow you to live with incredible passion and energy. And I know it because I've been there and I've done it. And I've watched other people do it. And I'll be sharing this story through this course of how I did it, how other people did it, most importantly, how you can do it. It all begins, as I spoke about in the first episode, with a commitment to values. What are values? For me, I can tell you I established my values because I didn't want to be defined by the bad decisions I made when I was 20. Instead, I wanted to be defined by how I responded to those decisions, and it's what I encourage you to do. In my case, I looked to the future. I thought about the people that I wanted to meet and prove worthy of their trust and their investment in my future. And so I just thought about those people. Those people I started to define as my avatars, thinking about my future probation officer, thinking about a future employer, thinking about a future creditor or sponsor. And I just started to reverse engineer. It doesn't matter what I think about values. It matters what they think. What can I do right now that would cause those people that I don't even know, what could I do right now that would cause those people to see me as something different from the bad decisions I made when I was 20? Because if I don't, they're always going to judge me for the bad decisions I made when I was 20. That's just what I accepted and came to conclude when I was locked in that jail cell. And in my case, I set these 3 principled course of actions. And I'll be talking about that every time because I am so passionate about wanting to spread this message to every listener, that to the extent that you can identify the values by which you profess to live, you can start manifesting those values. You can make them self-evident. How? Well, in my case, first of all, it was what? It was a contribution to education, a commitment to education. Number 2, it was a commitment to contributing to society. And number 3, it was a commitment to building a support network. That was what we discussed in the first video. Second video was talking about how do I define success in that area? How do I define success in that area? Well, I can tell you. For me, it was embarking upon the next stage of the prerequisite journey, establishing clearly defined goals, finding the goals by which are going to define success. In my case, contribution to society was going to be publishing. Didn't know how I was going to publish, but I was going to find a way to do it. With regard to education, what would my avatars expect? They would expect me to earn a university degree. That would be how they defined whether I was truly an educated person. Number 3, building a support system. What would it be? In my case, I said I need to find 10 people that I don't know, and persuade those 10 people to believe in me. Even though I don't know them and they don't know me and I'm sitting in jail, I'm going to find 10 people and persuade them to believe in me. And through the course, I'm going to show you how I executed that plan. Because what those 2 components are, they lead us into this video. Those initial components I just described, establishing my values, setting my goals, those are the prerequisites that lead us on to this mastermind journey. What does this mastermind journey mean? It's what Socrates taught. It's what Mandela taught. It's what Gandhi taught. It's what Bill Gates teaches. It's what Steve Jobs teaches. It is what Michael Jordan teaches. It is what the greatest athletes, the greatest musicians, the greatest leaders of all time all teach. We can learn from them. It all begins once you establish the values of what you want to be defined as. Once you set the clear goals, it begins with what? It begins with attitude, my friends. It begins with having the right attitude. And that's what I'm trying to talk about today in this particular video. Each of these videos lasts about 30 minutes. You also have the coursework here. You also have my podcasts that you can listen to, where I not only share the strategies that got me through 26 years in prison, but I interview other people who went through prison and emerged successfully, and I tell their stories. Why? Because I want you to see that regardless of what challenges you're going through right now, you can overcome. You can triumph. You can build something else. It doesn't happen by accident. It requires a deliberate course of action. And it all begins with a 100% commitment to success. That is how I defined the right attitude. That's what I said I was going to do while I was inside. I was going to completely obliterate the perceptions that society had of me as a young man. As a young man, I was just a reckless kid pursuing a fast life, and I understood that where it got me, and I didn't like where it got me, and I didn't want it for my future. But I also knew that the responsibility was mine. The responsibility was mine to change it. I could live any way I wanted to when I was slammed with that 45-year sentence. I could choose to go into prison and say, I'm going to try and just forget about the world outside, because that's what a lot of the prisoners were talking about. They would say, the best way to serve time is just forget about the world outside. And you just got to question the value of such guidance. If you're hearing that guidance in your jail or in your prison, I want you to look around the institution. I want you to look around the institution and see how many people who live by that code, who live by that creed, face enormous challenges. Get out of prison, can't find a job, can't find a place to live, can't find a way to really make it. And what happens? Come back in. I have a friend of mine. His name is Red. I just always like to use these names that are kind of common in prison because I don't want to identify anybody. But Red was a guy I knew when I was really at the earliest stages of my journey. And at the time that I got convicted, there was still parole in the federal system. So there were a lot of people in there that had long sentences, but they got out through parole. And Red was one of them. Red had already been in for about 10 years. He was about 32 or so. He came in when he was 25 or something like that, and he had a long sentence. But he was getting paroled after 10 years. And I was just starting, and we were in the same cell house. And Red had a routine in prison. Like some of you may have a routine. I mean, he worked in the prison factory as Unicor, worked in the factory, had a good job. Every day at the end of his job, he would come back to his cell. They'd eat dinner, then they'd drink hooch and play poker. It was a routine every single day. And Red's time was up. I mean, he'd been working out that sewing machine in the factory for years, and now he was going to go home. He was 32 years old. And he got out, and we had a talk before, he was looking forward to getting out, as everybody is. And I would say maybe a year passed. It wasn't more than a year and a half, but Red came back with a fresh 25 years. And I said to him, "What happened, bro? What happened? You were so excited to get out. How come it's only been a year and a half and you're back here with a fresh 25 calendars?" And he said, "You don't know what it's like out there, man." He said, "I got out, and my probation officer was on my back all the time about getting a job, and every time I went to try and get a job, they just wouldn't hire me. And I tried and tried and tried, and I just couldn't get hired, and eventually I just couldn't take it anymore, and so I robbed a bank, and I got busted." Got busted again. 25 years. Guess what, though? When he came back to prison, he got his same job back in Unicor, got his same cell back, and he was right back in the mix, going to Unicor, coming out, playing poker, drinking his hooch, and living where he was. What does that tell you? Because I've heard that story time and time again. It's the longer we get exposed to the system of corrections, the more we learn to live in that system. And the more we learn to live in that system, the more we learn to fail in society. And it's just tragic to me that I met so many people in prison who were on this installment plan of going to prison, getting out and coming back, and going out and getting out and coming back. And then their children grow up, and they're more inclined to come into the prison system. And so I just feel as if it's my duty and my calling to try and get in there, even though I'm now out in society and I've got a good career and I'm building my life. I feel very passionately about showing people inside, hey, you can break this chain, but it doesn't happen by accident. We've got to follow this path that we learned from masterminds. We've got to follow this path of overcoming struggle. How? By listening and learning from people who truly have done it. And that's what I want to share with you, is I want you to be thinking about your own avatars. I want you to be thinking about who are you going to meet in the future that's going to play an influence in your life. What are you going to do to prove worthy of those of the trust and the respect and the admiration? What are you going to do to persuade those people to give you a chance? Because the reality is, it's a very tough life out here for people who aren't prepared if you've got a criminal background. If you've got a criminal background, there's a lot of legislation going on right now that talks about they're going to ban the box. You may have heard of it, which means if you apply for a job, you've got to check, have you ever been convicted of a felony? You've got to check this box. But I got to tell you, that's not enough. Banning that legislation isn't enough. Being able to come out and talk, it's not enough to be able to come out of jail and just get a job. You've got to be thinking about coming out of jail and really living your dream and really being able to live the American dream. What's that? Control your own destiny, build a career, become a homeowner, have credit, drive the car that you want, live the life that you want. And not everybody has the same goals and ambitions and aspirations. I understand that. I don't ask you to adjust in such a way that is going to impress anybody else, but is going to be consistent with the values that you articulate and the very clearly defined goals that you establish. That's the path of a mastermind. It is the path that I learned from so many people. In fact, right now, I've got every one of these episodes, I've made a pledge to express my gratitude to sponsors. And right now, I'm going to express my gratitude to Golden State Lumber. Why? Because the CEO of Golden State Lumber, Leda Knopman, is a friend of mine. And him and his family have made an enormous contribution to these programs that I create so that I can create and distribute for free as many as I can to try and reach as many people as I can. And I want to thank Golden State Lumber that has not only helped me develop these programs, but has also helped me place a lot of formerly incarcerated people into the job market. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're in Northern California and you ever need lumber or you ever need the hardware that goes along with the building trays, please see my friends at Golden State Lumber. Let them know that Michael Santos sent you. Let them know that you're a sponsor, because the Knopman family is just really an extraordinarily generous group family. They're one of the top employers in the Bay Area, and I'm very proud to have them as sponsors of the Earning Freedom Mastermind Course. So that said, let me tell you a little bit about Leda Knopman, because he is not only a great businessman who's built an extraordinary business that employs more than 500 people and really is just a great contributor to society, but I want to tell you a little about what I learned from him, because he embodies this story of making 100% commitment to success. He embodies this message of what it means to have the right attitude, to live a values-based, goal-oriented life, and to make 100% commitment to it. I learned a lot from Lee. Now, I learned from him much later in my journey, and I wrote his book, so I know a lot about Lee. But I'm going to tell you one of the stories that always stuck with me. It was when he was a young man, and he had taken over and started building this Golden State Lumber. And he was driving down the road with a mentor of his. And Lee had just done pretty good revenue number in his business. And his buddy asked him, he said, "So what's your goal? What are you trying to achieve?" And Lee said, "I'm going to own 10 lumber yards. Each one of them is going to do $10 million a year in revenues. And I'll have a business that's doing $100 million a year in revenues." Big, audacious goal. And his buddy told him, Lee told me he was still driving, and his buddy looked over at him and he said, "Talk is cheap." And when Lee told me he heard that message, it drove a fire in him more than anything to make that 100% commitment to building what has become a phenomenal company with more than $500 million in revenues, and has made him an extraordinarily wealthy guy and a successful leading community citizen. And that message of a mastermind is the same that got me through 26 years in prison. It is the same that will get you out of whatever challenges you're facing right now, if you make 100% commitment to success. What do I talk about with that? Well, I can tell you what it meant for me. I'm in that prison system. I'm facing 26. I got a 45-year sentence. I understand by that point that as long as I, don't get into any trouble and I don't lose any good time, I can satisfy that 45-year sentence in 26 years. But keep that in perspective, because I hadn't even been alive yet for 26 years. I'm making these videos right now in 2015, the end of 2015. If somebody gets locked up today and they're not going to get out until the length of time that I serve, they won't be getting out until the end of 2041, 2042. And yet, they've got to maintain and keep a high level of energy and discipline through every one of those years and decades. How do they do it? I can tell you how they do it, because I can tell you what worked for me. What worked for me was following the path that I learned from masterminds. I learned from Socrates and Gandhi and Mandela, and we'll be talking about them. But I also learned from contemporary leaders like Leda Knopman, who continuously lived by his values, set clear goals. Every year he met with his family, and he had everybody define their goals. And they would meet throughout the year, and they would measure their goals. When I would go to his lumber yard, when I got out of prison, they would have on there, I remember seeing it. It was run in the Golden State Yard in Brisbane, which is just South San Francisco. They'd have these goals every month where everybody would be able to see what level of sales they're going, what their goal was for the month, and where they were cracking it every week. What did that do? What did that tell me? That tell me that all successful people, they're extraordinarily transparent. They invite the world to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. You can judge me as I make this progress. And, that's exactly what got me through prison. When I set my values of saying I'm going to educate myself, I'm going to contribute to society, I am going to build a support network. When I set the clear goals of saying I was going to define that by earning a university degree, by contributing to society through publishing, by finding 10 people to believe in me, those are the first things. But I had to have the right attitude. And that attitude would define my every decision. I would consider every decision by first saying, is this going to lead me closer to getting my university degree? Is this going to detract from me becoming a college graduate, a published author? Is this going to threaten the possibility of me finding 10 people to believe in me? So what do I mean by that? Well, in time, if you have an opportunity to read the books that I wrote, I would write about how it would define what time I went to sleep, what time I would wake up in the morning. In my book, Prison, my 8,344th day, it's the story of a single day in prison. And in that single day, what I would talk about, what time did I wake up? And as I recall, I woke up that day at like 1:30 in the morning, and I said I overslept. Why? Because that was my 100% commitment to success, was to wake so early in the morning that other people would be sleeping. And when I was awake during that early morning hours, in the solitude of quiet, I could channel my energy, channel my focus, channel my drive, and start focusing on the goals that I wanted to achieve that day. And that book was influenced by a book I read called A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, a guy who'd served 10 years in prison in Siberia. I wrote this book to describe a typical day during my 23rd year in prison. Why? Because I wanted to show other people what it meant to make a 100% commitment to success as I define success. And I define success how? Earning a university degree, becoming a published author, developing a strong support network. So what did that mean? That meant what time I woke up in the morning. That meant what level of work I got done by 5:30 or 6 in the morning. Then it meant going out and exercising, and I explain later in that book why fitness was so important to me. Then it would explain what I did after my fitness routine. Then it would explain who I spoke to. It would explain what decisions went through my mind when I interacted with every individual and why I made those decisions. Because I was following what? The path of a mastermind. So many masterminds. They left clues of success that I could follow, and I wanted to follow them. Steve Jobs, one of the masterminds who inspired me, once paraphrased a quote by Pablo Picasso, another mastermind who inspired me. And what they said was, a good artist copies ideas, a great artist steals ideas. And that's all I did. I stole ideas from the greatest masterminds that I ever came across, people that I could never aspire to have their level of wisdom. But through them, I could strive to emulate their success. I could strive to become something more than the bad decisions I made when I was 20 years old. And I could do it with a 100% commitment. That's what I defined as the right attitude. I can tell you I've interacted and met so many people who wanted to do well, but they didn't make 100% commitment. They didn't have the right attitude. I can't tell you how many courses I taught while I was incarcerated. And one of the questions I would ask about, what are you going to do when you get out? I cannot tell you. One thing I can absolutely say is there was not one time I asked that question in a classroom where fellows would say, well, I'm going to try to do the right thing when I get out of here. But if things don't work out, I'm going to do what a man has to do. And my response was always the same. Then save your bunk. Save your cell, because you're coming back. You see, there are so many stories like the one I told about Big Red. Guys who got out, wanted to make it, but they did not have the skill set. They did not have the tools. They did not have the values in place to overcome the challenges that are absolutely waiting for every individual who's serving time in a jail or a prison. The reality is you got to live in the world as it exists, not as you want it to be. And how does the world exist? It would be awesome to say we live in a world that is post-racism, that is post-prejudice, that is post-prison, that I served my time and I paid my debt to society. I got a news for you. None of that matters. If you want to succeed in society, then you've got to start planting the seeds today. You've got to start saying, I am going to draw a line in the sand today. And every decision I make going forward is going to advance my possibility, advance my prospect to succeed. Not just to get a job, not just to get out, not just to get off supervisors. I'm talking about crushing it. I'm talking about getting out, living with passion, and making things happen. That's one of the great quotes of Leda Knopman. It says, make it happen. Make it happen. I got a little statue that sits at my other desk, and it says, it's a picture of Lee, and it says on it, WWLD. What would Lee do? And that's one of the ways that I make my decisions going forward. I say, what would Lee do? Because Lee is an individual that I absolutely admire and respect. Why? Not only because he's an extraordinarily successful businessman, but he's an extraordinarily successful family man. He has built the most extraordinary company, and I always tell him, I know a lot of very wealthy, successful people, but I don't know anybody who's more successful than Lee. Not only in terms of his net worth, but in terms of everything that he has done. He's built this amazing family where you can meet his children, who are now the leaders of his company, and you would never know in a single minute how successful they are. Why? Because they're so humble and so giving, and that is not an easy task to do when you run a very successful company, to raise children that are really down to earth and just genuinely good people that want to help other people. And they've all helped me in so many ways, and I'm so grateful to them, which is why I feel compelled to always work to prove worthy of the investment that they have made in me. And how am I doing it? By trying to reach into places where people don't get that message. And I'm trying to persuade them, hey, think WWLD. What would Lee do? That's what guides my decision. Well, my question for you, who is your avatar? Who is your role model? Who are you trying to impress? Whose trust are you trying to earn? Who are you trying to prove worthy of having believe in you? When you ask those questions, and when you can find the answer, that's the first step to establishing your values. Then what? Then what is the next step? Set those clear goals. I told you what Lee's goal was. It was that within so many years, I am going to have 10 stores that do $10 million a year. I can tell you, he does more than $500 million a year right now. He has more than 500 employees. How did it happen? It happened by following the principles of masterminds, the principles that I'm striving for each of you to embrace. I can tell you how it has changed my life. And I was in those same chairs. I was in that same environment. And I want you to do the same. I want you to emerge from that environment strong, with your dignity intact, ready to truly come back to society, not begging for a job, not looking for a handout, but knowing that you have sown the seeds for success. That means that you can go into any environment and bring value. And when you can do that, that's when you truly can say, I am living the life of a mastermind. And my past does not dictate my future. No, I am effectively creating my own destiny. That's what we strive to teach in the Earning Freedom Mastermind Course. That's why I am so grateful to the masterminds who inspired me and continue to inspire me. And my pledge to you is that I will never ask you to do one thing that I don't do every single day, that I haven't done when I was locked in prison. And so I'll continue with the next episode where we're going to talk about the next advancement. Once you make a 100% commitment, then we're going to talk about what's the next step in this program. But for those of you who are listening to the program outside, I'm going to ask you to support this program, not by writing a check, but by simply going to iTunes if you have access to iTunes. I am urging you, please help me to get distribution by subscribing to the Earning Freedom Mastermind Program. I think it's just called Earning Freedom on iTunes with Michael Santos. And rate and review the show. If you find value in this message, please rate, review, subscribe to the show. It's free, and that gets me more distribution on iTunes. It allows me to penetrate more places where people need hope and inspiration, where I can spread this message of empowerment, of self-empowerment, and that is the way that I can live the message of my masterminds, not only Leda Knopman, but also Gandhi, who said, strive to be the change that you want to see in the world. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what I urge you to do. Thank you so much. I am Michael Santos with michaelsantos.com and prisonprofessor.com, and I'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you.